When I first played Assassin's Creed 3, I was 13 years old, and I thought it was boring as hell. Just a bunch of trees, wooden churches, an entire section where you play hide and seek with a bunch of kids who don't speak English. Where was the charming, charismatic Ezio? Where are the great monuments? Where's the fun? Because this game is a depressing slog with a whiny protagonist who's boring and annoying. It's been 10 years since then. My perspective has shifted a lot. I've gotten older, I've moved across the globe. I understand a lot of things I didn't back then, and many Assassin's Creed games have come and gone since Assassin's Creed 3. Yet, it's the one I always go back to. It has an allure to me that a lot of the other games in the franchise don't. It's a game that's doing things so much more artistically interesting than the rest. I couldn't see it 10 years ago, but I can see it now. And it all begins and ends with the game's protagonist, Radon Hagedon, or Connor as he's more commonly known. People don't like Connor. They didn't like him when the game came out, and for the most part they don't like him now. I get it. When the game first came out, I didn't like him much either. He's not Ezio. He's really not Ezio in any ways imaginable. I used to think this was a weakness of the game, but now I view it as the game's greatest strength. I'm going to massively overgeneralize here, but bear with me. There's roughly two kinds of Assassin's Creed protagonists: Ezio and other. And I'm not saying there isn't nuances between the characters on the left, but they all fall into the same archetype. They're all charming, funny, and charismatic. They're all trying to recapture that Ezio magic. And that's fine. I like most of these characters, and I get why they do this, because the one time they tried to do something different, everybody hated it. But as we've gone on and we've had more and more charming Assassin's Creed protagonists, it's just made Connor more interesting to me. The man's so boring, he changed the course of an entire franchise. Well, I'm here to say it's undeserved. The Connor is good, actually, and I'm here to explain why. Let me give you a brief overview of Connor and Assassin's Creed 3 for those who haven't played it or just need a reminder. Connor is a half-British, half-Native American living in the time of the American Revolution. He's the son of Haytham Kenway, leader of the Templars in the region, aka the bad guys, and after his mother is killed in a fire set by the Templars, he joins the assassins and hunts them all down. A fairly typical Assassin's Creed plot when you put it like that. So why don't people like him? Well, there's many reasons, and honestly, most of them are justified. Connor is permanently grumpy, he moans a lot, he gets angry and shouts a lot, he never tells jokes. In the main story, he basically never even smiles. He's also kind of a dummy. He spends the vast majority of the game being obviously used by people to get their own ends, which as a player who knows better can be very frustrating. And he's got a weird voice too. More on that one later. He's a big, angry idiot, which, let's be real, is not the most endearing of characters. I totally get why people couldn't gel with him. Like I said, when I first played, I didn't either. However, back then, I didn't get why he was like that. I was too young and too naive to see the crushing situation he's in and the things that shape him into the man he is. Let's revisit that wording. Connor is a Native American living during the American Revolution. When I was a kid, I didn't really get what that meant. I lived in Scotland. My only exposure to Native Americans was, shall we say, less than educational? To be honest, moving to Canada didn't really improve my understanding of Native issues. In all my years of education here, I learned more about it from studying to pass the citizenship test than I ever did in school, except for one lesson when my history teacher went rogue and did a lesson on residential skills, which was as informative as it was horrifying. It's my impression of North America that Native America is an uncomfortable secret that people would rather not talk about, because it's bad. It's really bad. Even in bonny old Canada, it's a story of betrayal and abuse and of genocide. And there's nothing that could be said or done to make up for that tragedy, so people prefer to just not talk about it. Assassin's Creed 3 does not try to avoid it. It goes all in, with all the soul-crushing detail that decision entails. More than anything else, the game is defined by one word: futility. That's a pretty hard sell in an action video game, but if you're along for the ride, I think it's a fascinating one. Assassin's Creed 3 could have avoided it entirely if they wanted to. They could have focused on the history that's actually taught, on Washington and Mad King George. They could have had a protagonist like Haytham Kenway, a charming white dude fighting for freedom. They even gave us a glimpse of what that game might look like. One of Assassin's Creed 3's most interesting creative decisions is that you don't start the game playing as the main character. Well, you do, because technically Desmond is the main character, but shh, for now. The first several hours of gameplay in colonial America are with Haytham, his journey across the seas, his establishment of the Order, and his meeting of Connor's mother. It's a fascinating look into what this game could have been, and it seems, the game that many people would have preferred. Haytham is every bit a protagonist in the vein of Ezio. He's charming, he's sarcastic, he's elegant, he's cool, and he's also got one hell of a white saviour complex. Playing this game for the first time without knowing the twist that Haytham is a bad guy is fun, but I think playing it with that understanding actually makes this prologue more interesting. There's two things this intro is trying to accomplish. One is that it's trying to solve the Assassin's Creed villain problem. I love the Ezio trilogy, but aside from the Borgia, I can't name or even picture any of the bad guys you kill in those games. They're just evil henchmen. So this long introduction sequence is a more in-depth look into the characters you're going to spend the rest of the game hunting down. I think it only really works for Haytham and Charles Lee, but still, that's clearly the intention. The second thing this introduction is doing is testing the audience's assumptions. It's showing us how easy it is to root for the bad guys, how easily we can be swayed by a charming face and a smile, how the lies that we thought were so black and white are in fact nothing but grey. One of the things you do with Haytham is free a bunch of natives from a slave trader. Seems like a pretty unabashedly good thing to do, and you feel pretty good about doing it. So much so that you might not even notice why you're doing it, at least not in a first playthrough. See, the gang aren't freeing the slaves because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because they need something. It's a favour, and they expect to be paid back.
Where did you get this?
From an old friend.
I've only seen such markings in one other place.
Where?
Well, it is forbidden for me to speak of it.
I saved your people. Does this mean nothing to you?
The prologue is full of little moments like this, moments that on replay make you realise that maybe you shouldn't have been so trusting. The clues were all there, and that's most clear in your interaction with the natives. They're a resource. These dudes want to sell them as slaves. Haytham wants them to tell him where a magic cave is. He doesn't value their culture, he doesn't value any sort of claim they have to the land, he just wants that cool magic cave. But it's so easy to trick yourself into seeing more in him, something that's directly addressed later in the game. He's so easy to root for because he's nice and he's charming and he has tender moments with Zio, Connor's mother. In her own words, maybe he did love her and care about her, but he doesn't care about her culture or her people. The other Templars call them savages and Haytham never disagrees, because he believes it. He may think Zio is nice and brave, but he views her as inferior to himself, with his fine clothes and stone buildings and guns, and most likely you think that too. There's an old phrase in US history, it was technically coined 100 years after when this game is set, but the ideals apply. Manifest destiny. It's the driving belief of the American expansion of the 19th century that America was destined by God to expand and spread democracy and capitalism across America, and that was the true and divine way of things. Or to put it more simply, we're better than the people who live here, and they'd be better off with our culture instead. I'd love to say that's a purely American belief, but it's really not. Residential schools operated all over Canada, buildings set up explicitly to re-educate native kids out of their cultural history. And the scariest part? The last of those schools closed in 1996, only 3 years before I was born. It's easy to condemn this stuff. The cruelty of these places and these historical actions is horrifying. Every few years it seems they dig up another mass grave of children. But if you're white anyway, there's a little voice in the back of your head that goes, but wouldn't they be better though? The colonists have better technology, better medicines, more advanced building technology and agriculture. Shouldn't they have given these things to the natives? Is that not a good thing to do? It's not racism, it's humanitarianism. There's a name for this one too, coined in 1899 by Rudyard Kipling. The white man's burden. The belief that it is our responsibility as noble and civilized white folk to colonize savage lands and bring civilization to them, whether they want it or not, because it's for their own good. It's a fundamentally white supremacist belief, one that sees white European culture as explicitly better than anything else. There is no burden. The desire to help comes from us assuming that there is a problem to solve and not having brick buildings and churches to Jesus. But that's not a problem that people are actually complaining about. It's a projection of one's own value onto a situation where they do not apply. To get back to the fiction of Assassin's Creed, it's a philosophy that matches perfectly with the Templars. The Templars, across all Assassin's Creed games, are driven by by the belief that humanity is fundamentally cruel and the only way to stop violence is through subjugation. It's a little more generalised than the white man's burden, but the philosophy is the same. We know better than you do, and we're going to make your life better whether you like it or not. That's why Haytham could never be the protagonist of this game, not just because he's one of the baddies, but because fundamentally a white European cannot be the good guy in this scenario. He cannot fight for freedom in a land that isn't even his to fight for, fighting for people who never asked to be fought for. That explains why we need Connor, but it doesn't quite explain why we want him. Something that I think is important to understand if you want to enjoy Assassin's Creed 3, and Connor specifically, is that it's a tragedy. It's not a feel-good story where the good guys win in the end. Connor kills all the bad guys, that's true, but it's more complicated than that. It's shades of grey, and up until the very end, Connor himself doesn't understand that. All of the Assassin's Creed games are set in the past, so in theory, we know what can and cannot happen. Our characters cannot change pivotal moments in history, but Assassin's Creed 3 is the only game that really uses that dramatic irony in such a heavy-handed way. We know the bleak future of Native Americans, the 100 years of genocide that is to follow, but Connor doesn't, and that's what makes it a tragedy. Let's revisit my initial description of Connor, shall we? He's a big, angry dummy. That's still true, but let's now actually pick apart why he's like this. Connor's number one character flaw is not anger or stupidity. His biggest flaw is naivety. Looking back, it's interesting to see how my own childhood naivety of racism and Native Americans was almost mirrored by the game itself. Connor sees these issues and sees the precarious situation his people are in, but he views the solution to that problem in extreme black and white. If I kill all the bad guys, then the problem will go away. That's his drive throughout the entire game. That's his stated goal and expected outcome. It's an almost comically simple idea, and yet it's kind of the driving force of the Assassin's Creed series. Isn't that exactly what Ezio does, after all? Assassin's Creed 3 is almost a direct response to the rest of the franchise. The Assassins, in opposition to the Templars, are freedom purists. Their exact philosophy is hard to pin down because it kind of changes from game to game, but whatever it is, they're the good guys. They oppose oppression and injustice. I hesitate to call them anarchists, but that's kind of the closest philosophy I can think of. They kill bad people and protect innocent people. What this game does that most of the others don't is acknowledge that if the Assassins were real, then clearly this method doesn't always work. Injustices happen all the time, and clearly the secret supervillain gang isn't responsible for all of it. What do we do about the fundamental truth that some people just suck? The Templars have an answer to this question. It's a bad one, but it's a plan. The Assassins really don't. In many ways, the entire organisation echoes Connor's own personal naivety. Just kill all the bad people. That methodology only works when the entire civilization isn't the bad people. When that's the case, what can you even do? A common problem people have with Connor is how much he ends up helping the American revolutionaries. Within the game's fiction, he's essentially a pivotal figure in their victory over the British, and while we as an audience know that his allegiance is going to backfire on him, it takes a long time for Connor to realise that because of his idealism. He sees the world in black and white, with heroes and villains. The British are the aggressors in this scenario, so clearly the revolutionaries must be the good guys, and while he is grumpy about it, he helps them out because he can't yet comprehend a conflict where neither side are the good guys. And that belief is what allows him to be so easily manipulated throughout the game. While he's not completely oblivious, he does call out the revolutionaries on their hypocrisy of owning slaves, which they're quick to rationalise away. He does completely fall for their message. He parrots a lot of their talking points about freedom from tyranny and the right to choose and all of this. And especially, he immediately falls into the trap of George Washington. Despite only having a brief introduction to the man, Connor immediately falls into the rest of the Patriots' idealism of him.
I know that the people wish to be free, and that men like Washington fight to make it so.
Something which I think the game handles with a lot of nuance is racism, specifically with the revolutionaries that Connor deals with. There's very little direct racism in the game. You get some name-calling in the prison, and Achilles mentions it a couple of times. It is, after all, why he gets the name Connor. But for the most part, people aren't hateful towards Connor. They're condescending to him. You can feel it especially with Samuel Adams, who you spend a lot of the early game with. There's nothing explicit, but you can feel it in the way he redirects deflects conversations, brushes off Connor's legitimate concerns, and twists Connor's goals as being tied to his own. None of them would be so brazen as to directly insult Connor, because he's extremely useful to them. He can solve a lot of problems for them, and whether it's intentional on their part or not, they are manipulating him. Someone who's definitely manipulating Connor is Haytham, which is what makes their segment of the game one of the most interesting. Around 2/3 of the way through the game, Haytham and Connor form a strange alliance to hunt down one of the other Templars who's gone rogue. It's a bad idea, and you know from the beginning that it can only end badly. So does Connor really, but he's not going to give up hope. The true object of Connor's hatred is Charles Lee. He's the one who led the attack on his village and was responsible for his mother's death. He's the reason he started this whole quest in the first place. Haytham, on the other hand, is his dad, and despite being more explicitly evil these days, he's still quite charming and affable, which is why Connor starts to hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for peace. It's once again a very naive belief, which as a player you can tell, but you can see why Connor wants to believe it might be true. There are little moments where you get the slightest hint that maybe they could get along. Then Haytham executes a prisoner and it's back to square one. In a way, Haytham is hopeful for that too, though he's more hopeful in the I can probably convince my ignorant son to join me instead type way, which comes to a head in the most pivotal scene in the game. Haytham and Connor have come to George Washington to warn him of an imminent attack. At this point in the game, you've saved his life countless times and won many battles for him. He seems thankful for the news, but as you're giving it, Haytham sneaks a look at his letters. As it turns out, Washington just ordered an attack on Connor's village, under false information that they may be siding with the Loyalists. And then, to add insult to injury, Haytham reveals that it was Washington who ordered the attack on his village 14 years ago.
And so now you see what happens to this great man when under duress. He makes excuses, displaces blame, does a great many things, in fact, except take responsibility.
Enough! Who did what and why must wait. My people come first.
Then let's be off.
No. You and I are finished.
Son.
Do you think me so soft that by calling me son, I might change my mind? How long did you sit on this information, or am I to believe you discovered it now? My mother's blood may stain another's hands, but Charles Lee is no less a monster, and all he does by your command. A warning to you both. Choose to follow me or oppose me, and I will kill you.
Throughout the whole game, Connor had been operating under the false belief that if his people just stayed neutral, if they didn't pick a side, then they would be safe. Even as it became clearer and clearer that it wasn't the case, he clung to the idea that only he needs to fight while his home can stay safe and away from the danger. He sides with the Patriots because he believes in their cause, in freedom from tyranny. He just assumed that freedom from tyranny would also be good for his people. But now we reach a turning point. His naivety has finally caught up to him. He can save his village, but he'll never salvage their trust in him, and it costs him dearly. It's only here, after all of this, that Connor finally starts to see that the Patriots are not his allies, and never were. While Haytham miscalculated that Connor would be thankful for this news, he was right that it would break his idealism. The only thing left now is vengeance. But before we get to that, let's talk about why this game isn't 100% a dreary nightmare. Connor is not purely naivety and angst. These are not overly likeable qualities, but they do contribute to the things that I do really like about Connor. Connor is extremely open with his emotions, a trait that's really rare in men. He shouts a lot and he has many blowout arguments with Achilles, but it's because he doesn't have any filters. When turned the other way, it becomes quite an endearing quality. The homestead is an entirely optional segment of the game that I think brings out the best in Connor's personality, because it's the only time in the game where he drops the assassin persona, visually represented by him wearing his hood down. It's a series of missions where you help a bunch of misfits and castaways build up a new community. These missions bring out what I think is the most interesting part of Connor's personality, that he's not a leading man, he's not charismatic, he's kinda shy and awkward and constantly downplays his own accomplishments. Some of my favourite interactions in the game are when Norris, the French miner, is trying to start a relationship with the huntress Miriam, because it's so clear that Connor has no idea what he's doing in that department.
I like her.
She is a good friend. We all do.
Not like that, Connor.
Oh. Well, good for you. Prudence.
Good day, Connor.
Norris is trying to court a woman. What do you women like? In terms of gifts.
I totally get why people find him boring, because outside of when he gets mad, he's a really quiet and contemplative guy. He's an introvert, and that's so rare amongst video game protagonists. Another thing to add is the, shall we say, odd voice work done for the character.
Leaving home was harder than I thought. I expected the journey would fill me with a sort of pride, a sense of accomplishment. But whatever it was that carried me away from home soon fled, replaced by questions and no small amount of doubt. Had I been too hasty? Had I made a mistake? The others in the village, they thought this was something I wanted, something I chose to do. But it never felt that way to me. No, it was not a choice. It was an obligation. Because if not me, then who?
When casting Connor, Ubisoft made the correct decision to cast a native actor, so for the role they got a guy called Noah Watts. Noah Watts is not a professional voice actor. He only has 29 credits on IMDb, and 4 of those are Connor. His performance is often critiqued as being flat and dry, but I've never really found that to be the case. It's just that he has a voice that's totally different from the kinds of voices we're used to in protagonists. He's extremely soft-spoken and uses a very odd cadence when talking, a deliberate choice to emphasise that English is his second language. And yes, his delivery is kind of flat, but I actually think that the sort of amateurish quality of the performance makes the character more believable. That might be the most pretentious art critic thing I've ever argued. Another place where the dialogue can seem kind of flat is the scenes in the Mohawk village, because they also make the decision to have them speak in their authentic language, which is a bold choice to be sure, and I'm not sure it fully worked.
Yung zaskats. Nekti doni gari was tona yo tunhage. Nona ska guidene ne, the wasa gayeri ni hadi runungwe, kaa ta hunana dafkoge. So nona askana nage ne, ta de watna neda. Iga gar hagunsu on doratu, kaa unzage undaditaru.
See, when you do scenes in a different language, you already risk a language barrier and the need for subtitles, but I actually think the bigger issue is emotional inflection. For example, when I speak like this, you can tell that I'm angry, or when I speak like this, you can tell that I'm really excited. And when I speak like this, you can infer nothing because I am speaking like a robot. When you switch to another language, it already becomes harder to do this, but it's still possible, unless of course the people speaking the language don't know it, which is the case for Assassin's Creed 3. That's not exactly shocking. The language they speak in this game as of 2016 has just under 4,000 speakers around the world, so it's not exactly shocking that Connor's voice actor isn't fluent. The team brought in a language expert to consult on the game and teach the actors how to say the lines, but I'm guessing emotional inflection was slightly too advanced for them. It makes for a very weird performance. You can read the emotion of the lines, but you can't hear it.
Arahaja zidogane gando ayetiri hune kiswas saha odisas tasirayanda ne. Yungwadora is in a tona ya de wayer hage. Yungwayat do dar he un zino gayera ne de tiswa neda. Danu ne dogat tona de wayere yot deru ayungwajonha se.
I think the use of the original language, though, is important, regardless of how dry it might sound, because of how it adds to the tragedy of it all. It's one of the many things Connor loses. At the start of this video, I said Assassin's Creed 3 could be defined by one word: futility, and this is what I meant. There is nothing Connor could do, no war he could fight that meant his people would be safe. Whether he sided with the Patriots or the Loyalists, his people would lose. We know that from the future because we're not currently living in the Mohawk Nation, but Connor has to learn that the hard way. It's the endgame now. Hatham is dead. Dead protecting Charles Lee from Connor. His father is dead. His mentor is dead. His best friend is dead. Deaths he could do nothing to prevent. But he can kill Charles Lee and prevent any more suffering he might cause. For this last sequence, Connor shaves his hair into a wolf tail and applies war paint to his face. There's no hiding who he is anymore, no question of his allegiance. He's going to kill Charles Lee, and he does so not as a patriot, not as an assassin, but as a Mohawk.
You try so hard, but it always ends the same. Those who know you think you mad, and this is why. Even those men you sought to save have turned their backs on you. Yet you fight. You resist. Why?
Because no one else will.
He gets his revenge, America gets its freedom, Desmond gets tricked by an ancient space princess, and then we have 3 extremely poignant epilogue cutscenes. Early in the game, Connor embedded a hatchet in a post of the mansion. As he explains, when his people start a war, a hatchet is embedded in a post until the war is over, and there that hatchet stays for the whole game. Until now, Connor limps out to it, still weak from his fight with Lee, and grabs it. He looks around for a second at the empty trees. The war is won, and it gained him nothing. He can fight the Templars, stop their shady schemes, but he couldn't fight time itself. Next, he travels to New York to witness the British leaving. The people cheer freedom from tyranny and oppression, and just for a second, Connor smiles, at which point he turns to see the slave market opening for the morning. For all their talk of freedom, the colonists can't see the hypocrisy standing right behind them. Finally, Connor returns home, to his village. There's no one there but an old hermit. He explains that the people left many weeks ago, that the land was sold by the new American government, and the people moved west to try and avoid what's to come. He explains how selling the land is a better option than taxes at the moment, and admires the cleverness of the new leaders for the manoeuvre. And that's where we leave Connor. His people, the very thing he fought for all game long, are gone. Not because of a war, not because of a secret society's machinations, but because politically, selling their ancestral land is better than taxes. It's a truly crushing place to end things. While Connor is not alone, he has the homestead. The people of the homestead are his friends, not his family. After all, they don't even know or care to know his real name. They'll never speak to him in his native tongue. He's alone in all the ways that matter to him, and despite all his skills, all his rage, there's nothing he could have done to stop it. I used to think Assassin's Creed 3 was boring, and that's certainly the reputation it has within the franchise, the boring one. But now I see it as the only game in the franchise that really has something to say. Ubisoft is a company that I have a lot of problems with. Their continued sheltering of abusers, their attempt to mainstream NFTs, just generally the monetization practices in their modern catalogue, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and their continued insistence that they don't make political games. It's one of the most frustrating things about their modern catalogue, their continued denial of having something worth saying. Assassin's Creed 3 stands as the last time Ubisoft made something truly meaningful. I like some of the games that have come out after. I like them quite a lot, but none of them have the teeth that this game had. It's a critique of the very foundations of America. It posits that the fundamental belief that America is the land of the free is built on a lie, and if modern events haven't shown that to be true, I don't know what will. It's not a perfect game, and I would never argue that it is. There are some design choices in this game that I just find fundamentally stupid. But it is an important game, and it's going to stick with me much longer than the rest of the franchise because of it. Hi, I'm doing this now. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, I would be very thankful if you could hit the like and subscribe button. Up here you can see another Assassin's Creed video on Assassin's Creed Valhalla and why I hate it so much. And down here is a video that the YouTube algorithm has recommended will be good for you, if you can trust such evil machinations. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.